Now you're famous.
Woohoo!
Okay. So, it's a little bit warm in here. How are you guys doing today? Okay. Do I have any gang members in here? Nobody wants to admit that? So let me ask you something. What does a middle-aged white guy who's born and raised in Utah, central eastern Utah, so I'm a Mormon, and I'm follically challenged, because I'm bald, but I'm horizontally gifted, because I'm white, right? What do I know about gangs? So, the city or the town that I grew up in was about 2,500 people. That's a small town, isn't it? There's high schools in Anchorage that are bigger than the town I grew up in. Our high school had 450 students total for the entire county. It's called Emory County High School. So there were 9 different little towns in Emory County. And we all went to the same high school, 450 students. We were either coal miners or farmers. That's what we did. And I did not meet another person of another race or ethnicity until I was in college. The entire county was all white. So do you think I was a little sheltered? Yeah. I had no idea what gangs were. I didn't know what they were. Then I joined the military. Now, when I joined the military, I went to Belgium for 2 years. There weren't many gangs over there, but there were a lot of terrorists. I was in Europe in the mid-'80s. But then I went to Guam. Does anybody know Guam? Yeah, Guam, little tiny island. It's only 35 miles long, 12 to 15 miles wide. But there's tens of thousands of people that live down there, and guess what? Anything that happens in California happens in Guam. Because there's huge ties with the Guam population to the California population. And so if you have gangs in California, guess what you have in Guam? Gangs. And you know, I was there in 88 to 91 for 3 years. Have you guys ever seen lowriders? Have you ever seen lowriders with hydraulics? That bounce around, you know, and they dance and do all kinds of stuff, right? Guess what's cruising the streets of Guam? Lowriders with hydraulics, right? So it was actually pretty interesting. The closest I've ever come to shooting somebody in the line of duty was in Guam. We actually had a gang fight on base, in the base housing. We had a gang of military dependents that lived on base, and there was a rival gang that actually climbed the fence into the base housing area and got into a big rumble. And there was a kid that was holding a .38 revolver that started to point it at me, and I almost shot him. I had the trigger halfway pulled. I had pressure on the trigger and was getting ready to shoot him when he finally dropped the gun. Guess what, though? It wasn't a .38 revolver. It looked exactly like a .38 revolver, but it was a Crossman pellet gun. CO2 cartridge in the butt of it. But from 30 feet away, it looked like a real gun because it didn't have any red on it, right? It was shaped just like a .38 revolver. Then I moved up here to Alaska. My first apartment that I lived in was at 6th and Boniface. You guys familiar with Rocky Mountain Court?
Yes.
That's where I lived. I lived there for a couple of years. I joined the police department, and what do you think happened to my patrol car the first day I parked it in front of my apartment?
It got stolen.
It got vandalized. I had 3 tires slashed. So I told my wife, I said, we need to move. So guess where we moved?
Here.
Moved to South Mountain View. Burgon the Glen. I live on 3rd Avenue and Park Street. You guys know where Clark Middle School is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about 4 blocks from my house. And I've been there for 22, 23 years now. How many of you have heard of the Desiree Douglas homicide?
Yeah.
How many of you have heard of Devontae Jordan? 17-year-old boy that was shot up in Mountain View. 2 of the 3 shooters involved in Devontae Jordan were captured 3 doors down from my house, where they were hiding out with their cousins. So that's the neighborhood that I've lived in. Do you think I've learned a lot about gangs?
Yeah. Yes.
Because I've been living among them, right? And guess where I patrolled? I started with APD in '93. Guess where my first patrol area was? Mountain View. Guess where my favorite patrol area is? Mountain View. I love Mountain View. Because, you know what? Gang members, it's not illegal to be a gang member. Did you guys realize that? It's not a crime. Right? It's the activities they're involved in that are illegal. Here, I need to move on. I'm going to run out of time again, so just be prepared. You're going to want me to stay. Guaranteed. You're going to love me. Am I full of myself?
No.
Huh? A little bit?
No.
No, this is really an interesting topic, and you guys are going to enjoy it. Does Alaska have a gang problem? Okay, how many of you were born and raised outside of Alaska? How many of you were born and raised in neighborhoods that had gangs? Okay, what neighborhood?
In was it Gardens Park in Florida?
Florida? What part of Florida? Where's that?
In North Florida.
North Florida?
Riverside, California.
Riverside, California. Okay, who else? Anybody else? Born and raised outside of Alaska in a gang neighborhood.
No, I don't remember what neighborhood, but I remember what town.
What town?
Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit. Yeah, we have a bunch of gang members from Detroit up here. We have gang members from all over the lower 48 up here. About 50% of our gangs are from the lower 48. We have gangs out of Chicago, out of Detroit, out of Raleigh, North Carolina, Sacramento, California, Salt Lake City, Utah, Seattle, Tacoma, Portland. Does that amaze you? Why did they come to Alaska? There's several reasons. The main reason that they come up here is for the drug money. Because you can make a lot of money selling drugs up here. And the further you go into the interior of Alaska, the more money you can make. But what's dangerous about going into the interior of Alaska? It's cold. Let me ask you something. If you go to a village like Kotzebue and you're not Native Alaskan, do you stand out?
Yeah.
So I got to go to Nome several years ago and testify in a trial of a Mountain View Crip who was in Kotzebue dealing drugs. He was African American, tattooed, saggy pants, blue bandanas. Do you think he was easy to spot in Kotzebue?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have no idea why he went up there to deal drugs. But I got to go and testify, and the judge, the prosecution was asking for 8 years in prison for him. And the judge gave him 12 years in prison because of my testimony about his gang activity. So he doesn't like me very much. How many of you have heard of Khalil? Khalil was 15 years old when he was shot and killed at the Diamond Center. In 2005, he and a couple of girlfriends were down at the Diamond Center and they were getting harassed by a couple of members of the Juvenile Delinquents, which is a rival gang. Finally, he got tired of it, and as they walked out of the doors of the mall over by Old Navy, Khalil pulled his gun, the other two guys pulled their guns, and there was a shootout. And of course, we get all the 911 calls, right? And as we're responding to the Diamond Center, we get calls that there are guys running down the old Seward Highway with guns in their hands. But the interesting thing is, they weren't running away from the mall. They were running towards the mall. Because what do you think Khalil's girlfriends did when he got shot? You think they called 911?
Yeah.
No, they called all his homeboys. Khalil just got shot. We need help. And they lived just a couple blocks north of Diamond on Old Seward. And so they grabbed their guns and started running to the mall. So not only are we responding to the shooting at the mall, we're now chasing guys through the neighborhoods, right? Over the snow berms and things like that. We caught a couple of them. We got a couple of guns. There's a revolver there. There's an SKS rifle there. There's ammunition there. We did a search warrant on their apartment, and we found more guns. Now, Khalil was a member of a gang called the Soldier Crew. See, he's wearing camouflage. Soldier Crew wears camouflage for their colors. And they were formed at Clark Middle School. There were a couple brothers and their friends that decided they wanted to be the biggest, baddest gang in Anchorage. And so they went to all the gang members at Clark. All of the Crips, all of the Bloods, all the folk, all the people, everybody. And they said, we want you to be part of our gang. We don't care what your gang association is. We want you to be part of our gang. And just about everybody but the Pacific Islanders joined their gang. There were a couple Pacific Islanders that joined, but not all of them. And by the time they got to East High School, there was over 70 members of that gang. So after the shooting, we began to look for the suspect, Alberto Geraldo Zayas, who was a member of the Juvenile Delinquents. Of course, he and his buddies had fled the scene. And we ended up finding him out in Palmer. And there was an arrest team that was formed of SWAT, troopers, APD, ATF, marshals, FBI. There was a whole bunch of people going to arrest him. And you've seen on TV how SWAT works, right? They got all the gear on, the helmets, the rifles and everything. And as they're going up the driveway to go make the arrest, he's actually in a vehicle sitting in the driveway. His female cousin is the driver. He's the passenger. And he's yelling at her, drive, drive, drive. And she's refusing to drive. So he assaults her and throws her out of the vehicle and steals her car. And we have a big pursuit inbound on the Glen Highway. And we spike his tires at the Connect River Bridge and get him stopped on the Eklutna Flats. Because he's on rims, he's got no tires left. And we take him into custody. Now normally when we arrest somebody, what do we do with them? Handcuff him, but we take him to the station to interview him, right? But Alberto was taken to the hospital because he had a gunshot wound in his lower leg. And you can see that gunshot wound runs the length of his leg. It's what we call FOT, finger on the trigger. What happens when your adrenaline's pumping?
Yes.
Your muscles twitch, right? And they don't always do what you want them to do. Well, he shot himself.
Oh.
Either as he's pulling the gun out of his belt or as he's putting it back into his belt, he had his finger on the trigger, his muscles contracted, and he pulled the trigger and shot himself. And it ran down the length of the inside of his thigh. But guess what? We did not arrest Alberto for Khalil's murder. Why? Yes. When I was telling the story, what did I say? Khalil pulled his gun first. So it was self-defense. Okay? These guys pulled their guns after Khalil did. He started shooting first. So it's self-defense. A little while later, we had another shooting. You guys know where the liquor store is over on North Boniface? There's the Tesoro in that strip mall, and at the far end, there's a liquor store. Party Time Liquor, I think it is. So this young man, Kentron Navette, a.k.a. Kinfolk, member of the Gangster Disciples. Gangster Disciples is a pretty hardcore gang out of Chicago, very large. He was at the liquor store with his cousin, Victor Pepper. Victor was 14. Kentron went inside the liquor store. Within minutes of Kentron going inside, Tinius Talamaiva and his brother and an associate gang member showed up at the liquor store. Tinius was the leader of a Pacific Islander gang called Outlaws. Tinius goes into the store, sees Kentron, doesn't like Kentron. So he and his brother and friend, they jump Kentron. And they start to assault him. And they're breaking liquor bottles over his head, and they're hitting him with beer cans. And there's a surveillance video that shows this whole fight going on. So, Victor Pepper, being the good 14-year-old cousin that he was, grabbed his 9mm out from underneath the seat of the car and ran into the liquor store and began shooting at Tinius and his friends. Tinius grabbed his gun and began shooting back at Victor and actually chased Victor out of the store and around the corner into the alley. Now, Victor got hit in the ankle, and it almost ripped his foot off of his leg. There was a piece of skin on the front of the ankle that was holding his foot on his leg. Now, when your foot gets torn off, what happens? Can't run. What, bleed?
Yeah.
You're bleeding. The femoral artery gets destroyed, right? How long does it take to bleed to death from an artery?
About 10 seconds.
About a minute and a half. Minute and a half. So officers showed up fast enough that they were able to save his life, and they were able to reattach his foot. And he still runs from us today. So, 14 years old, right? In a shootout. Tinius, in the meantime, gets shot multiple times, jumps into a car, his brother drives him to the hospital, where he is declared deceased. Multiple gunshot wounds to the chest. Kentron, you can see he's got some injuries. He's got some bruising on his face. He's got some staples in his head. But not very serious injuries, right? But still, we did not charge Victor for the homicide of Tinius. Why? Self-defense. Right? Tinius and his brothers and friends were assaulting Kentron. Correct?
Yeah.
So Victor was defending his cousin. So you can do self-defense in defense of yourself and others. Okay? What does this mean to a gang member?
Rather than jump the flag, whether or not it's
Okay, so they call it a flag, right?
Yeah.
How do you feel when somebody burns the American flag in protest?
Well,
You know, I'm very patriotic. I did 23 years in the military. When somebody burns the flag in protest, that pisses me off.
Or turns it upside down.
It's very disrespectful, yeah. It's very disrespectful. Right? So, when people call this their flag, and somebody burns it, that's like the ultimate disrespect, right? That's a 10-inch piece of cloth. Does it really mean that much?
That's
To the gun.
To the gang it does. What's that?
So you wear it on your head sometimes.
Yeah. What do you think happened to the Crip that burned this blood's flag?
They got shot to death.
He jumps in the passenger seat of this car. There's at least 7 rounds put through the windshield, and he's declared deceased. Now that happened in Fairbanks. How many of you have heard of Desiree Douglas? 17 years old. She was shot to death at a gang shootout at a house party in Muldoon, 36 in Muldoon. So Desiree was with her boyfriend, Julio Batista. And they were at the party. Julio was there with his brothers and friends, associate gang members. This was a 2-day house party. Mom and Dad had bought a keg for the kids, and then they left for the weekend, and they left their kids at the house to have a party. And for 2 days, Friday and Saturday, they had a party. There were at least 6 different gangs that showed up to this party. Okay? So think about that when you decide to go to a house party here in Anchorage. We've had multiple shootings and several homicides at house parties because rival gangs will show up uninvited. Happens all the time. So they're at a house party. Julio's brothers and friends leave the party to take some girls home. And that's when Warren Lynch, Chris Mejia, and Dejon Hale show up. Now Chris Mejia was a member of a gang called the Face Side Bloods. Face comes from Boniface. Side comes from East Side. So Face Side. So they were basically the East Side Bloods or Boniface Bloods. Okay? And then Warren Lynch was the leader of a gang called Corrupted Crew. Corrupted Crew was an unusual gang. They were a hybrid gang. They had Crips and Bloods. So what color are the Kansas City Chiefs? Red. How about the Royals?
Blue.
Blue. So it's all about the symbol. It's not about the color. KC wears red and blue. Okay? So Warren Lynch and Julio Batista didn't like each other. So when Warren and his boys show up, they jump Julio and they beat him up. Julio leaves, the party runs next door. Calls his brothers. So his brothers, Eon Alone, Miguel, and Mr. Wright, go back to the party. As soon as they pull up to the curb, they jump out with their guns. And Warren Lynch and his boys step out of the house with their guns, and there's a gun battle. And also involved in that were these 4 guys. Sharon Joshua, Devontae Jordan, Paul Baldwin, Paris Harris. Money over bitches, MOB. What does that mean? Money's more important than women, right? Than girls. But guess what else? Have you guys seen that recent article about all the Fairview Bloods that were arrested?
Yeah.
Fairview MOB? But they're not money over bitches. They are members of Blood. So Crips that are MOB call themselves money over bitches because they don't want to call themselves Bloods. But Bloods call themselves member of Bloods. But MOB, again, like KC, is a hybrid gang. Crips and Bloods in the same gang. So these guys were on Warren Lynch's side. So they're shooting also. So we're talking at least 7 guys at the house shooting, right? And we're talking at least 5 guys on Julio's side. And then we have Moises and Angel Martin-Laura, who are on Julio's side. So we've got at least 7 guys on each side that are shooting. At least 10 guns fired. Desiree Douglas was running across the grass. She got shot in the back of the head and killed on the front lawn of the house, trying to get out of the line of fire. Now, I spent a year and a half putting together background information on these guys. Went to the grand jury, and we indicted 8 people for Desiree Douglas's murder. And the judge threw all the gang information out of the court. Said it was prejudicial that we couldn't use it in court. So we ended up having to plead all these guys down to misdemeanor assault. Time served for the murder of a 17-year-old girl. So, remember Devontae Jordan? Part of MOB, right? Involved in Desiree Douglas homicide. So a year and a half later, Devontae Jordan shot and killed in Mountain View for snitching. and he's shot and killed by his own gang members. Remember, not Baldwin. Oh, I just had his name up there. I'm sorry, my slides are cut off. He's 17. He was 18 and a half. He was indicted on 2 capital murder cases, Desiree Douglas and Devontae Jordan, at the age of 18 and a half. How many of you have heard about Out to Cut Records? Bay Dilla. Out to Cut Records was a pretty popular rap group here in Alaska. And in 2012, there were 12 members that got indicted for conspiracy to import 50 kilos of cocaine. And you can see all these guys are adults. So do you think gangs are an adult problem or a youth problem? It starts out as a youth problem. But a lot of these guys continue that activity into their adulthood. Okay? The median age, the average age of the gang members that I've identified in Anchorage is 28 years old. And there are gang members in Anchorage that are in their 60s that are still gangbanging. Does that surprise you?
Nope.
They were gang members back in the 70s down in California. They moved up here, they're still banging. And guess what they taught their kids? Gang banging. How about their grandkids? Gang banging. How about their great-grandkids? Gang banging. We have 4th generation, 5th generation gang members in Alaska. April 1st, 2014, so this is a little more recent, right? We had a shooting where Precious Alex. Does anybody know Precious? Her family? Precious was in bed asleep, and somebody walked up to the apartment window and shot through the glass and killed her in her bed. Now, it was a retaliation for a gang assault that happened earlier, and the shooter was not intending to kill her. He thought he was shooting an adult member of the family. But still, do the gang members care about anybody else but themselves? No. How many of you remember the shooting that happened at Rum Runners, where Brandon Tatua shot Angel Martin Laura? Brandon Tatua is a blood gang member from West High School. Angel and Moises are Crips. Brandon used to hang out downtown at the clubs while his cousins were inside. He was too young. He was only 18. And for 3 weeks, Angel and Moises and all his boys would drive down 4th Avenue and threaten Brandon and his buddies. So if you were always getting threatened by somebody at the same location, the same day, the same time, what would you do? Stop going. Right? Stop going to that place. Report it to the police. Right? Get some help. Tell somebody else. But you know, this is what Brandon did. Brandon put on his red Boston Red Sox hat, his red Boston Red Sox jacket, his red tennis shoes, and he bought a gun, and he went down on the avenue, dressed all in red, with his gun. Now, why did he do that? Any idea? What happens if a gang member backs down from a threat, from a challenge?
He's called a coward.
Called a coward. Do you guys know what street cred is?
Yeah.
Respect, right? Gangs are all about respect. But how do they get respect? 4-letter word that starts with F, and it's not profanity. Through fear, right? And so you don't want to show that you're afraid, that you're intimidated. You have to accept the challenge, and you have to step up and confront the challenge as a gang member. How many of you know what the Samurai Bushido Code is all about? You ever heard of losing face? Losing respect? That's what they do in Asia, right? That's what they call it. Losing respect, losing face. It's the same thing with gangs. So gangs can't back down from a challenge. So, January of last year, we're talking just a little over 12 months ago, I was on patrol, and I personally responded to this. There was a home invasion shooting on Rika Drive. Now, you guys heard about the double homicide on 41st Court, where Christian Haynes and Crystal Hawk were shot to death? 3 days before that, their apartment was home invaded. The door kicked in, 2 guys in masks went into the apartment, fired at least 40 rounds in the apartment. Missed all of them. But there's the bedroom that they were in, the master bedroom, has an adjoining wall to the next door apartment. And there was a lady in bed Her bed is against that same wall. And the bullets went around her body, over her bed, through the wall from the adjoining apartment. She could have died, right? Do you think the gang members cared?
No.
Not at all. Oh, I forgot to tell you, when Brandon shot Angel, he fired 2 rounds at Angel, hit him twice. Then he fired 3 rounds at Angel's 3 buddies. Those 3 rounds missed those guys. Where do bullets go when they miss something?
They keep on going until they hit something.
They keep going until they hit something. There was a young lady, 24 years old, who was hit 2.5 blocks down 4th Avenue by one of those bullets. Just above the clavicle, just missed her aortic artery. All she was doing was crossing the street to get into her car. Do you think the gang members care?
No. Nope.
We had a 15-year-old boy that was out delivering papers with his dad in Fairview and got shot. They didn't even know who was in the car. The car had just been purchased. They bought the car 2 weeks earlier. They bought it from a known gang member that had some problems with guys in Fairview. The guys in Fairview saw the car and assumed it was their rival and shot it and hit the 15-year-old boy delivering newspapers. We had an Air Force young man that was killed in Spenard back in the early 90s. He had the same color, make, and model car as a rival gang member for a gang called Agents in Control, AIC. AIC saw the car drive past them. They jumped in their car. They actually rammed it off the road at a traffic light and shot him to death, thinking that it was their rival gang member. And it was an airman from Elmendorf Air Force Base. So the gangs don't care. So we had this home invasion. I knew Christian very well. I kind of got in his face about it. He told me who it was that was shooting him up. And then his brother Christopher shows up, and I told him, don't retaliate. Well, 3 hours later, they go to a rival gang apartment on San Roberto and shot it up. 3 days later, they're shot to death. And it's the Fairview MOB that did all those shootings. The guys that just got indicted on all those federal drug charges. So this is the Fairview MOB. They have a rap group called All the Time Entertainment. 25-count indictment, naming 12 of them for conspiracy, trafficking, firearms, money laundering. Tattoo Fairview. These are all their names. And look, 36 down to 21. They're all adults. Okay, so let's try to get through this room. How do we identify a gang? What do we look for? Colors they wear, behavior, tattoos, the group. Okay, so there's actually a state statute, 1181-900, that defines what a criminal street gang is. And it says that it's a group of 3 or more people that have something that identifies them as a group. So that could fit a Little League baseball team, right?
Yep.
Because they all wear uniforms. Could be the Anchorage Police Department. We all wear uniforms and badges, right? But then the other half of the equation is they have to attempt or commit 2 felony crimes in the preceding 3 years. So there has to be a criminal element. You could say that you're a gang member, you could get tattoos, you could sag your pants, you could wear bandanas, you could do all that stuff, but until you commit felony crimes, you're not considered a gang.
Until you technically can't do 2 until 3 years, like for 3 years.
2 within the 3-year period. And so it's like a chicken and egg thing. I have to have gang members committing crimes to be able to validate the gang, right? But I can't call them gang members until the gang's validated. So how do I do that? Right? I can go back 3 years, right? I can go back 2 years, and then I can go 3 years into the future from the date I first identify somebody. So I have a 5-year period of time that I can look at all their activity, what they're involved in, who they associate with, how they dress, and all that act, and all that stuff, okay? My best source of information for gang validations is what? What do you think is my best source of information? Where do you guys hang out with all your friends? How do you talk to your friends? How do you know what's going on in the world?
Social media.
Social media. Everybody puts everything on social media. You wouldn't believe how many of these guys have open public profiles. And they've got pictures of their tattoos, of their colors. They've got information about their activities. And guess what? I have social media accounts on about 35 different social media platforms. And I am not a white cop on social media. What do you think I am on social media? I'm a Pacific Islander gang member out of California. And I have thousands of friends. And I'm on Snapchat, and I'm on Pinterest, and I'm on Instagram, and I'm on MySpace, and I'm on Facebook.
How do you use Snapchat?
Well, you've got friends, right? And they're always sending out photos. I get photos all the time, especially parties. I'm a party animal. I go to all the parties in town. I've never been to one. And nobody's ever seen me, but yet everybody tags me as being at the parties. You know? They'll tag me on all the photos. And I'm always talking about how cool the party was. Right? So, I'm a party. How many of you personally know every single friend you've got on social media? No. How many of you know every single friend personally on Facebook? Because guess what? I've got 2,500 friends on my gang profile, and none of them have ever met me. You might want to check yours. I might be your friend.
So they think you're just another gang member?
They think I'm another gang member. Yeah. Okay, so respect equals fear. We already talked about that, right? When kids are joining gangs, why are they joining gangs? What do gangs tell them? What are they going to gain from it? Protection. What else?
Free stuff.
What?
Free stuff.
Free stuff. They say, we're going to be your family. We're going to protect you. We're going to give you money, right? You're going to have respect. But what about, so protection. How many of you right now, and I hope you're all not part of a gang, how many of you right now have at least 5 people in Anchorage that are willing to shoot and kill you on sight? But guess what? If you're a gang member, how many people do you think you have in town that are willing to shoot and kill you on sight?
Probably.
Every rival gang member, right? So how's that protection?
Not really.
It's not. Because your gang can't hang all together all the time, right? And let me ask you something. If you're trying to get away from the discipline in your home, do gangs have discipline?
Yeah.
Absolutely. We have video that was taken by Chicago PD of the Latin Kings in Chicago. 200 gang members hanging out at a park having a meeting. And they take a bandana from a guy, they send him off to the side, they have a meeting, they decide 6 guys are going to beat him up for 60 seconds. That's his punishment. 6 guys will go over there and they beat the tar out of this kid. He's not allowed to retaliate, and the only thing he can do to defend himself is cover up. How much damage can 6 adult men do to a person in 60 seconds?
A lot.
A lot. What would happen if your parents did that to you? They'd go to jail, right? So do you think discipline in a gang is worse than discipline at home? Absolutely. But we just don't like being tied down by rules that our parents give us, right? But I guarantee you the gangs give you even more severe rules than the family ever will. Okay? Because the gangs will dictate who you can be friends with. They'll dictate who you can date and hang out. The gangs will dictate your life. Recruiting. This is my gang.
That's so evil.
I know, don't they? Anybody can look evil. Grover's getting high. So, this is a couple of family photos from Fairbanks. You can see him, he's got his blue bandana, he's throwing his pitchforks. That's for Folk Nation, Gangster Disciples out of Chicago, right? And then over here in this picture, and guess how old he is?
About 14.
15. He's got his grill. He's throwing his fork. This is Dad, who's got his grill, throwing his pitchfork. Do you think that this little boy has any hope of not being in a gang? No, it's a family affair. Like I said, we've got gang members in their 60s here in Anchorage. And their kids were gang members, their grandkids were gang members, their great-grandkids are growing up to be gang members. So you do end up getting a lot of money as a gang member because you deal drugs. It's quick money. But how much money do they save for retirement?
No.
How many of you personally know a retired gang member that's living on all the money that they made? No, because you do it long enough, guess what? The police catch you. And what do we do with all your money? We take it. How many of you have seen that black Hummer that our SWAT sergeant drives around?
With the glowing lights.
It's got lights and a radio in it. It's a black Humvee. And that we seized from a drug dealer. He paid cash for it, and it had $12,000 worth of rims on it when we took it from him. We auctioned off the rims, and we kept the car. Let's see, number 1 location for recruitment. What age do they start recruiting?
7, 8, 5.
Yeah, 3rd, 4th, 5th grades, typically. Why? What's happening in elementary school?
Well, I was going to say they recruited them at such a young age so they would get used to it by the time they were older.
Okay, but what's happening in elementary school?
Like,
Fights. Fights because of what?
Anger.
But it comes from the B word. B-U-L-L-Y.
Bullies.
Bullying. There's a social scientist by the name of Skinner that did a study back in the 50s of Chicago gang members. Okay? And he determined that gangs form on the playgrounds of elementary school because of bullying. Now, not all the groups of kids on the playgrounds that get together for protection form gangs, but some of them do. Yeah, it starts out as a group of close friends, but then as you get into middle school and high school, it morphs into groupthink, peer pressure, right? And you start doing things you wouldn't normally do because of the peer pressure, the group pressure. In fact, I gave in to peer pressure recently. My wife came to me about 2 weeks ago. She said, Scott, you are retired. I want you to grow a beard. So I'm growing a beard. Beards are hard to take care of, right? That's a lot of work. I'd rather just shave it all off. But my wife pressured me into growing a beard. So I gave in to peer pressure. Don't do it. Don't grow a beard.
well, my dad is. He just
Your dad
retired.
is?
He just retired.
So for 2 years, I worked undercover with the FBI Safe Streets Task Force. And I had grown my beard out long enough that I could braid it. I had an earring. I wore cut-off gloves, leather jacket. I drove around a 99 Tahoe that was all blacked out. And I bought guns and drugs from gang members in Mountain View, Fairview, Spenard, Jewel Lake, Muldoon for 2 years. I looked like a biker. I looked like a Hell's Angel. And I had a blast. How many of you are adrenaline junkies?
A what?
Adrenaline junkies. You like it when your heartbeat gets up there and it's like you're doing something really exciting. You're on the edge. That's what an adrenaline junkie is. If you like to skydive, that's adrenaline junkie.
You have to be 18.
Right? What's that?
You have to be 18.
You have to be 18 to skydive, yes. But I'm just talking about the feeling.
Oh.
Cops are adrenaline junkies. Do you think our adrenaline pumps on a regular basis? If we're going to a man with a gun call or we're going to a fight with knives or something like that, do you think the adrenaline's running? Yeah. Well, it's not necessarily all about excitement, but your adrenaline pumps when you're getting into some kind of a heightened emotional state, right? And so for 2 years, I'm driving around in this Tahoe acting like a gang member, and man, it was adrenaline all the time. There were many times when I was driving through Mountain View and I actually pulled my gun out of the holster and set it in my lap because I thought I was going to be involved in a shooting. Because people knew the truck I was driving. Because guess what? That 99 Tahoe was a seizure. We took it from a well-known drug dealer. And I'm driving it around through Mountain View and they wanted to know who's in that truck. And so people were actually walking in the street in the front of my vehicle to see through the windshield because they couldn't see through the side windows because they're all tinted. They wanted to see who was in the vehicle. It was an adrenaline rush. So you can see this picture right here. A couple of gang members. They're in a church taking pictures. Yeah, I've got pictures. Some of my friends got pictures. I'm Mormon, right? I go to the Maplewood Church over there off Maplewood Northern Lights. And I've seen some friends of mine, some Pacific Islanders, that have taken pictures in the church at Maplewood throwing their gang signs, wearing their bandanas. So, males are the #1 population. Fastest growing population, though, white females, 14 to 16. They're joining gangs in huge numbers. Okay, they're involved in all kinds of things. Drugs, drug trafficking, gang crimes, all about reputation. We identify them through colors, Bloods, Crips, Folk Nation, People Nation. You identify them through graffiti. Sometimes, y'all are kind enough to name all your friends on Facebook or something. This picture right here, it's got all the street names for everybody. I've arrested many of these guys. In fact, a few years ago, right here at Begich, we had a group of girls that were tagging the PTA. And it's not the Parent-Teacher Association. It was some girls from the Philippines, and they called themselves the Pinoy Tagging Association. PTA. And so while I was involved in the investigation, I got onto Facebook and MySpace and things like that, and I identified a bunch of them. And there was one young man, a Hmong boy, who had identified over 35 associate gang members on his MySpace page. Told me what gang he was in, what colors they flew, and everything. It was pretty nice. You see all these symbols. Throwing their pitchforks. So you see pitchforks up for gangster disciples. And this is actually a pitchfork down, showing disrespect to it. So you're going to find rival gangs use the same symbols, but it's all about the orientation. If it's up, it's positive. If it's down, it's negative. If it's crossed out, it's negative. See, and they all wear jewelry. I wish this wasn't cut off. Hey, what about belt buckles? You think you could use a belt buckle to flag your gang association? Yeah. LT. Laotian Thugs. And what gang do you think they're in? What color is his belt?
Blue.
Yeah, he's a Crip. Camouflage, soldier crew. Area codes. How many of you have area codes on your social profiles? Like on 907 or wherever you might be, 808 or whatever. It's not an indicator of gang membership, but a lot of these guys use that to represent where they're from. Right? You can see ATL, Atlanta, IE. What's IE? Inland Empire. It's a huge apartment complex in California that's got all kinds of gang problems. Right? How many of you put A-Town or Anchortown for Anchorage? A lot of us do. You see? Area codes. 601, he's out of Mississippi. What about numbers? Numbers identified with gangs? Absolutely. Sometimes it could be as simple as A is 1, B is 2, C is 3. But then you also have the phone dial. You guys know that there's letters under the numbers on the phone dial, right? So 326 is FAM. FAM is FAM Band. FAM Band is a gang out of West High School and Service High School. Gang signs. Most gang signs start out as rudimentary sign language, and then they modify it and change it, add all kinds of symbols. 5-pointed stars, 6-pointed stars, tattoos. Gang graffiti. So if gang graffiti is crossed out, it's negative. If it's got 187, 187 is California Penal Code for homicide. That means they're threatening to kill you. If they put it upside down, it's negative. So I like to look at all of it. So you can see LDC, Lope Down Crips, Outlaws, Soldier Crew, Iceberg Clique, IBC, TRG, Tiny Rascal Gang. Folk and Blood for life. Folk and Blood are supposed to be on opposite sides, but in Mountain View, they put them on the same side. 2 headstones, Soldier Crew. Now, you see the D is crossed out?
I know where that is.
The D represents Damu. Damu is Swahili for blood. So, a Crip, when he writes anything that's got a letter representing bloods, he'll cross it out. So he crosses out the D, and you'll see him cross out the B, and you'll see him cross out P, because P stands for Pinoy. I'm sorry, not Pinoy, Piru. Piru. Piru Street in Compton is where the blood started. MTV. Now, when I first moved up here, MTV was tagged all over the place. And I thought, a lot of people really like MTV music videos, right? Because that was like in the early 90s, you know, and MTV was pretty big. And then I found out it actually meant Mountain View Crips. It was a gang. So, these are a few guns that we've seized. This was a traffic stop out in Wasilla on Canigous Bay Road. 2 gang members from Mountain View had 2 15-year-old girls in the car with them. Said they were going out to Point McKenzie to go target shooting. So, this young man, Nebreha, the same year this picture was taken, he was voted to be the Kid of the Year for Boys and Girls Club in Alaska. Eric Nebreha. Fairbanks. Social media. We're actually almost done.
Got a minute?
So, think about it. Do you have a right to privacy? And I can't show it down here. Do you have a right to privacy on your social media account?
Yeah.
No. You do not. I can use anything that I can find on social media in court. I do not need a search warrant. The only reason I need a search warrant is to find out who you really are. I have to go to Facebook or MySpace or Pinterest or Instagram or whoever has the headquarters and give them a search warrant to actually find out the IP address and the name and all the information used to create the account. But any information you put online is public domain. Doesn't matter if your profile is private or public. So think about that. Be careful what you put online. Hey, thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
I think I have this class now.
Oh, you do? That's Thank you.
I like that.
Oh. Hey guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Pass it on to the other schools too.
Definitely.
Because I think it's something that all the kids need. Huh?
Since they'll be going over to Clark,
I have not.
okay,
No.
I'll talk with her because that's
Oh.
one they'll need too.
Okay.